Let me tell you about the morning I finally decided to leave. Not the morning I booked the ticket, not the morning I landed in Manila, but the morning the decision actually became real inside me. It was a Tuesday in February, about 3 years ago now. I was sitting in the kitchen of the house my husband Frank and I had shared for 34 years in a suburb outside of Columbus, Ohio. The house was completely silent. It is a particular kind of silence, the kind that only exists in a house that used to be full and isn't anymore. And I had been living inside that silence for 2 years by then, ever since Frank passed. Heart attack. Fast, which people always tell you is a mercy, and maybe it is. But it doesn't make the Tuesday mornings any quieter. I had a cup of coffee in front of me that I hadn't touched. I was looking out the window at the backyard at the bird feeder Frank had put up himself the spring before he died, and I thought very clearly, as clearly as I have ever thought anything in my life, I cannot do one more winter in this house. I am 70 years old and I am not ready to just sit here and wait. And I want you to hear that because everything that came after started from that one quiet Tuesday morning thought. So let me tell you where I am right now. Not someday, not in theory. Right now, this morning, I'm sitting on the covered porch of a small apartment in a city in the central Philippines. And it is already 83 degrees at 8 in the morning, and there is a ceiling fan turning slowly above me. And I can hear the street vendors starting up outside, and somewhere down the lane a rooster is making his opinions known, even though it is absolutely not that rooster's business what time it is. I have a cup of real Filipino coffee, the mountain-grown kind, thick and dark, costs me almost nothing. The bougainvillea that climbs the wall across from my porch is so aggressively purple, it looks almost fake. I am 72 years old. I am a widow. I live alone on the other side of the world from everyone I raised my children near. And I am, without any drama or exaggeration, the most at peace I have been since Frank died. If you're watching this tonight and something in your own life has gotten very quiet in a way you didn't ask for, stay with me. Drop a comment below and tell me where you're watching from. I read every single one. My name is Margaret, though everyone here calls me Maggie, which Frank always called me too, and I like that continuity more than I expected to. I am 72 years old. Frank and I were married for 34 years. We had 2 children, a son named Daniel, who is in Seattle with his wife and their 2 kids, and a daughter, Susan, who is 43 and lives in Columbus, and who cried for approximately 2 weeks straight when I told her what I was planning to do. Frank worked in insurance. I taught 3rd grade for 26 years and then retired at 62, and we had a full decade together after that, which I know a lot of couples don't get, and which I am grateful for every single day, even when the gratitude sits right next to the grief, and it's hard to tell them apart. When Frank passed, I was 70. The house was paid off, the kids were grown. Social Security came in each month, $1,380, along with a small teacher's pension from the state, another $310, so just under $1,700 a month total. In Ohio, with the house paid off, that was manageable. Utilities, groceries, car insurance, my Medicare supplement, a few medications. I wasn't struggling exactly. But I was watching the savings move in one direction only, and more than the money, I was watching something else drain away, something harder to name. Purpose, maybe. Or the sense that the days still belonged to me rather than just happening to me while I waited for the next one. 2 years of that Tuesday morning silence can do something to a person that's very hard to describe to someone who hasn't felt it. I want to be honest with you about what actually started this, because it wasn't a grand plan or a bucket list item or anything that dramatic. It was a video. I was up at 2 in the morning, the way you are when sleep has stopped being reliable, scrolling through YouTube, looking for nothing in particular, and I found a video of a woman, probably my age, sitting outside at a table with a glass of something cold, talking about her grocery bill in the Philippines. She was calm in a way that reached right through the screen. I watched it once, then again. Then I watched 6 more. Different people, different cities, different islands, but the same quality underneath all of it. People my age who had stopped just surviving their days and started actually inhabiting them. I didn't tell anyone for 3 months. I just kept researching quietly, the way I used to prepare lesson plans, methodically. Every detail written in a notebook I kept in my nightstand so the kids wouldn't spot it on the kitchen counter and start asking questions I wasn't ready to answer. I told Susan first, which was the right call and also the harder call. She went through every stage of the conversation in about 20 minutes. First, she thought I was confused about something. Then she thought someone had gotten into my head online. Then she cried. Then she got practical, the way she does when she's actually processing something, and started asking real questions about healthcare and visas and whether I'd actually been to the Philippines before, which I had not. By the end of dinner, she hadn't said she was glad I was doing it, but she'd stopped trying to talk me out of it, which with Susan is essentially the same thing. She made me promise to call every single Sunday. I have not missed one yet. Daniel took it better, which surprised me. He said, and I will never forget this. Mom, Dad wouldn't have wanted you to sit in that house forever, which was the most useful thing anyone said to me in that entire period, because he was right, and I needed to hear it from one of them. If any of you watching this have been sitting in your own version of that house, whatever it looks like for you, drop a comment. You don't have to explain the whole thing. Just tell me you know what I mean. Then came the selling of things, which nobody glamorizes, and I will not either, because it is exhausting in a way that has nothing to do with physical labor. 34 years of a shared life turns into an astonishing volume of objects, and every single one of them has a memory attached to it like a tag. Frank's woodworking tools, the china we got as a wedding gift and used maybe 4 times, a sectional sofa we'd argued pleasantly about for years, him wanting leather, me wanting something softer, and we'd landed on something neither of us loved entirely, and both of us loved anyway because it was ours. The kids took what they wanted. The rest went through Facebook Marketplace and an estate sale company that handled most of it in a single weekend for a percentage. I kept Frank's watch, a photograph from our trip to Ireland in 2011, and a small wooden cardinal he'd carved himself the winter before he died. Everything else became money in a savings account, and the house, which we'd owned outright, sold in 11 days and gave me a cushion I hadn't expected. My daughter drove me to the airport. She held it together better than I expected until the very last minute, and then at security she grabbed my arm and said, "Mom, you can always come back. If it's not right, you can just come back." And I told her I knew that. But standing there in that line with my 2 checked bags and my carry-on, I knew something she didn't quite know yet. I wasn't going to need to come back. I couldn't have explained why I was so sure. I just was. The flight was long in the way that only a flight across an entire ocean can be. Manila, then a smaller plane south to the island I'd chosen after 4 months of research. I landed disoriented and travel-worn in a way that went well beyond jet lag. It was more like my body and my brain had quietly agreed to table all serious conversation until further notice. I walked out of the small regional airport into the heat, and it stopped me completely. I had read about it. I had watched videos about it. I want to tell you gently but clearly that you have not understood it until it is actually wrapped around you. Thick, warm, fragrant in a way I couldn't quite identify. Something flowering, something frying, something green and alive underneath it all. I stood there with my bags for a full minute, just breathing, thinking, well, Maggie, here you are. I'd booked 2 weeks in a small guest house to give myself time to find an apartment without panicking. The woman who ran it, a compact, efficient woman in her 60s named Nora, took one look at me, arriving 2 hours late and slightly wilted from the travel, and simply handed me a cold glass of something citrus and said, "You rest first. Everything else tomorrow." Not a question. Just the right thing, said plainly. I liked her immediately. The apartment hunt took about 10 days, and I want to tell you honestly that it is nothing like renting an apartment in the United States. There is no rental office with a glass front and a woman at a desk with a brochure. You find places by walking neighborhoods, by looking for handwritten signs on gates, by asking your guest house owner, by posting in the local Facebook group, and being pleasantly surprised by how quickly real people respond. I looked at 7 apartments. Some were too dark, no airflow, heat collectors. One was lovely but felt isolated in a way that wasn't right for someone arriving alone and still getting her bearings. What I found on day 9 was a 1-bedroom on the 2nd floor of a quiet building 2 blocks from the market, with a covered porch that caught the breeze in the afternoon, tile floors that stayed cool underfoot, a ceiling fan in every room, and 1 wall unit in the bedroom for the worst of the heat at night. 15,000 pesos a month. At the exchange rate then, right around $265. In Columbus, I'd been paying property taxes on a house I was rattling around alone in. Here I would have everything I needed within a 10-minute walk, and a porch to sit on while I figured out what came next. Let me give you the real numbers, because I think that's the most useful thing I can do for anyone watching this who is doing their own math on their own quiet Tuesday morning. Rent is $265. Electricity, depending on how much I run the bedroom air conditioning, somewhere between $30 and $55. Water is almost nothing, around $6 a month, which still startles me. Internet, reliable enough for video calls with Susan and the grandchildren, is $20. Groceries, shopping, mostly at the wet market for produce and fish, with the regular grocery store for packaged items, come to about $100 a month. I eat out regularly. This is not a splurge here. A full meal with rice costs $1.50, sometimes less. My 2 prescriptions, blood pressure medication and a thyroid pill I've been on for years, cost me about $16 a month here total. Those same prescriptions were running me close to $55 in Ohio, even with my supplement. Add it all together, and my real monthly expenses land somewhere around $580 to $640 a month. My Social Security and pension together are $1,690 a month. For the first time since Frank passed, I am not watching the savings move in one direction. I am adding to them every single month on a fixed income that felt tight in Ohio and feels like freedom here. I want you to sit with that for a moment, because I sat with it for a long time before I believed it was real. But I want to be honest with you about what nobody fully prepares you for. Because a story that is only numbers and sunshine is a story that is leaving something important out. The loneliness in those first months was real, and it arrived at moments I didn't expect. Not constantly, not even most of the time, but in specific, sudden moments that caught me completely off guard. The moment something happened that was funny or strange or lovely, and I turned to say something to someone who wasn't there. The moment I passed a couple walking along the boulevard at sunset. Not young, just a regular older couple walking slowly together the way Frank and I used to walk, and the feeling that hit me then had nothing to do with the Philippines and everything to do with something that had nothing to do with geography. I had not moved to the Philippines to outrun grief. I knew better than that. But grief has its own schedule, and it doesn't care where you've relocated. And people asked me consistently, both online and in phone calls home, whether I was thinking about dating, whether I'd put myself out there, whether I was open to meeting someone. I want to answer that honestly, the way I'd answer a friend. I was not looking. That was not what this was about for me. Frank was the person. I'm not saying I've closed every door forever. I'm 72, not a nun. But I moved to the Philippines to build a life, not to find a replacement for the one I'd lost. Those are very different motivations, and confusing them leads to very different outcomes. What I found instead, which surprised me more than almost anything, was a version of myself I'd misplaced somewhere in the years of being Frank's wife, and Daniel and Susan's mother and Mrs. Patterson to 26 years of third graders. A woman who could figure things out on her own, who could navigate an unfamiliar city and handle a bureaucratic mess and find a doctor and negotiate a lease and make herself understood in a country where she didn't speak the language and come out the other side intact. I had not realized how much I had quietly stopped believing I could do things on my own until I started doing them, one small thing at a time, and discovering that I still could. Comment below and tell me. What's something you've done completely on your own that surprised you? I genuinely want to know. About 5 months in, I got sick. A fever that came on fast and wouldn't break for 3 days. Nothing that turned out to be serious, but serious enough in the moment, alone in a foreign country at 71, that I want to tell you about it honestly. Back in Ohio, I would have known exactly what to do. Which urgent care, which insurance card, which forms to fill out. Here, I genuinely didn't know where to begin. A year earlier, that uncertainty would have sent me into a spiral. Instead, I simply asked my neighbor, a quiet woman in her 50s named Cora, who had started bringing me fresh fruit from the market on Saturday mornings for reasons I still can't entirely explain, except that is simply the kind of thing that happens here. Cora walked me to a small clinic herself and stayed until she was sure I was settled. The doctor spoke careful, patient English. The whole visit, blood work, and everything cost less than $40. I sat in the waiting room afterward feeling wrung out, and also, underneath it, something else. Something that felt almost like pride. I had handled it. By myself. At 71 years old, in a country that was still relatively new to me, I had handled it without falling apart and without calling Susan in a panic at 3 a.m. her time. Cora brought me congee, the rice porridge that evening, and sat with me for an hour and talked about nothing in particular while I ate it. She owed me absolutely nothing. She barely knew me. And she sat there anyway, and the thing I thought about later, lying in the dark with the ceiling fan turning, was how long it had been since someone had simply sat with me. Not managing me, not worrying about me from a distance, not calling to check in. Just sat there, present, close enough to hand me a spoon. I want to be straight with you about the practical concerns because I think glossing over them doesn't serve anyone. Healthcare here genuinely impressed me for the everyday things. Affordable, English-speaking doctors, shorter waits than I'd ever experienced in the American system, a pharmacist who actually had time to answer questions. But I am realistic that for anything truly serious, major cardiac event, anything requiring complex surgery, I would be looking at a larger hospital in a bigger city, and I have savings specifically set aside for that possibility and a travel medical insurance policy that runs me about $145 a year. Medicare does not cover you abroad. That is a fact that every American considering this needs to sit with carefully before they book anything. I am not frightened by it. I am prepared for it, which is a different thing entirely. The visa paperwork has its own specific tedium. Tourist extensions, offices with unpredictable lunch breaks, lines that move on a schedule only they understand. None of it has been unbearable. All of it has required the patience I used to have to summon for parent-teacher conferences and have apparently retained. The friendships that have grown here surprised me more than the finances, more than the weather, more than anything else about this move. There is a woman named Feely who has the vegetable stand nearest the entrance of the market, and who, after about 3 weeks of my showing up every other morning, started setting aside the best kangkong and the ripest tomatoes before I arrived, and scolding me gently if she thought I was buying more than I could use before it turned. There is a retired school teacher named Remedios who lives in the building next to mine, and who comes over on Thursday evenings, and we drink coffee, and she teaches me Bisaya words and laughs with an absolute lack of self-consciousness at my pronunciation, the kind of laugh that makes you feel included rather than embarrassed. There is a tricycle driver named Dodong who figured out very early on exactly which route I prefer to the church on Sunday mornings, and now just starts driving it without my saying a word. These are not dramatic friendships. They are small, daily, consistent, and they have woven me into the fabric of this particular street, this particular neighborhood, in a way that still catches me off guard when I stop to notice it. Back in Columbus, I had lived on the same block for 34 years and known my neighbors well enough to wave at. Here, 18 months in, people know my name, know my habits, notice when I haven't walked past in a day or two. There is a word they use here, pakikisama, which doesn't translate neatly into English, but means something close to the art of getting along, of belonging to each other, of being genuinely part of the group around you rather than just adjacent to it. I did not know I was starving for that until I found it. My daughter Susan visited 8 months after I arrived. I want to tell you about that visit because it was one of the most important things that happened to me in this whole chapter. She came, I think, half expecting to find her mother diminished somehow, rattling around alone in a foreign country, maybe a little lost, maybe a little sad, in need of being brought home. Instead, she watched Feely at the market press the good mangoes into my hands and refuse my money. She watched Remedio stop by on Thursday evening, and the three of us sit on the porch together while the street went quiet. She watched Dodong wave from his tricycle on Sunday morning. On her last evening, we sat on my porch while the light went that deep, warm gold it goes here in the late afternoon, and she was quiet for a while in the way Susan gets when something has genuinely landed for her. And then she said, "Mom, this is actually a life. This is a real life you've built here." And I told her, yes, it is. That's exactly what it is. So let me tell you what an ordinary day looks like now, because I think that's the thing people most want to know and least often get a straight answer to. I wake up early, the light and the heat, and honestly, the roosters see to that whether I've planned it or not. Coffee on the porch before the day gets too warm, 20 minutes of watching the street come to life below, vendors, school children in their white and navy uniforms, the first tricycles of the morning, and doing absolutely nothing else, which is a habit I did not have in Ohio and have come to protect fiercely. A walk to the market most mornings, slow, stopping to talk to Feely and whoever else I run into, which takes longer than it needs to and is better for it. Afternoons I read, or rest through the worst of the heat, or video call Susan and the grandchildren, who think it is the most exotic and interesting thing that their grandmother lives somewhere with geckos on the ceiling and real tropical mangoes in the kitchen. Thursday evenings with Remedios, Sunday mornings to the church 2 streets over, where the Mass is in Bisaya, and I understand perhaps 40% of it, and feel completely welcome anyway. I think about the woman sitting in that silent kitchen in Columbus on a Tuesday morning in February, looking at a bird feeder, wondering if this was all there was left. I think about her with a great deal of tenderness. She was frightened, and she was right to be frightened. What she was contemplating was not a small thing. But she did it anyway. She packed the 2 bags and said goodbye to her daughter at the airport and got on the plane and figured it out one small day at a time, and I am so glad she did. If you are sitting somewhere tonight in your own quiet house, your own quiet Tuesday, your own version of that kitchen, whether it's grief that got you there or finances, or just the creeping feeling that the life you're living has stopped quite fitting the person you actually are, I want to say this to you directly. You are not too old. It is not too late. The life you're imagining is not a fantasy for other people. It is available. It is on the other side of a long flight, and some paperwork and a wall of heat and a rooster who has no concept of appropriate timing. Comment below and tell me where you're watching from tonight, and tell me honestly what your Tuesday morning looked like. The real one. I read every comment, every single one, and I understand more of them than you might expect. The fan is turning above me right now. Feely saved me the good mangoes this morning. Remedios comes Thursday. Frank would have loved this porch. I think finally, at 72 years old, I am exactly where I'm supposed to be.